Well, we are studying the book of Joshua, and we come to Joshua chapter 13, which I am labeling today wasted opportunities, because that's the emphasis that I'm going to give. When I come to this passage tonight, I have to admit I have a considerable amount of nostalgia connected to it, because I have preached this particular text probably 12 to 15 times at least, maybe 20 times over the years. When the first talk that I ever gave at Cedar Park, I had been attending here since 1979, and the pastor was George Johnson, the founding pastor, and I was the education director for the Northwest Ministry Network, what's called that now. And so he asked me to do a session for the Sunday school teachers. So I did. And I taught on this text. And it was basically about dividing up the land, dividing up the responsibilities to each of the groups, and build the work of God that way. And when I became pastor here on May 1st, 1981, 40 years ago, this was my first sermon. And so I consider it my anniversary sermon, and it's just interesting that we're at the 40th anniversary here shortly, and I'm on this text. It just happened to turn out that way. So anyway, it's kind of fun to think about that. And when I started at Cedar Park, it was a small church, relatively speaking, one part-time employee, and I was part-time to start with. But it didn't have a very well-developed ministry. There was one Sunday school class for all kids, and up through 6th grade, and they did have a youth group, but not much else was going on. And so my basic first approach was just to try to get ordinary stuff going. Get a men's group, get a women's group, get a youth group, get a Sunday school for every age, and adult classes, and just ordinary how you do a church kind of a thing. And that is basically divide the land and aim at all the targets, and just develop them one by one. So that was 40 years ago, and I've preached it a number of times since. But it's not related to this text, but I want to go back 50 years. You show up Wednesday night, you're going to get whatever you get, right? And so 50 years ago, that's how far I want to go back, to May 1st, 1971. I was a student at Willamette University. I was student body president, and I was also a member of the National Student Association. And there was a number of student groups back then, like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee by Stokely Carmichael, who eventually became the Prime Minister of the Black Panthers. But it's amazing how much 1971 is like 2021. There was a lot of the same issues. And so, for example, Stokely Carmichael was promoting a radical black agenda, and the goal was to tear down American institutions, to have a new kind of economy, and to basically, that was the Black Power movement. Started out as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was the head of that. But then he went to the Black Panthers, and then from there he went to a Pan-African independence kind of a movement and lived out of the country. But there were riots. There were riots in Washington, D.C. After Martin Luther King was assassinated, they rioted in Washington, D.C. They rioted down in L.A. at Watts. There were lots of riots centered around police brutality and racism. I mean, it's like nothing has changed in 50 years. It was all of that kind of stuff. And I was, as a student, I was involved in this. I've always believed what I believe now. I really haven't changed my beliefs one iota, to tell you the truth, in all my 71 years. And I was chairman of the College Republicans at the time in Oregon. And so I was involved in political stuff that way. But when I was a member of the Student Association, the National Student Association, I was appointed to that position to represent our university. Well, the moment I was appointed, very shortly, I started getting newspapers once a week from Cuba. And it was communist propaganda through and through. I can still see it in my mind's eye. They printed in black and red. So that the combination of those two colors on newsprint. But it was all the communist viewpoint. It was very anti-American, but particularly it was anti-war, against the Vietnam War and how bad America was in that regard. And it was against America as being a racist country. So this was the communist agenda back in 1971. And I had a front row seat because I was getting all of this propaganda, and what they wanted out of me was to mobilize my university to do protesting and to join in the anti-Americanism and all of that. And so I'm a student, and I was on the debate team, and I was also, in 1970, October of 1970, I really surrendered my life to Christ, and so I was vigorous in my faith on the university campus, and we saw quite a revival in my dorm and on the campus. And I was well positioned as the president to have an influence on the university. In fact, a lot of the speakers that they were bringing in that I kind of inherited were radicals. You know, Stokely Carmichael was one, H. Rap Brown, who followed Stokely Carmichael. So these were all the Black Power advocates, revolutionaries, wanted to overthrow America. And Charles Reich, the greening of America. So the whole green thing. And I don't know, there was a group called Osberg, Ralph Nader, I don't know if you know that name. But he was organizing, Osberg was Oregon Student Public Interest Research Group. And so they would come to the universities and try to get university funds, student funds, in order to fund this, green revolution kind of a thing. And they were quite successful at it. They didn't get any money out of my university because I had something to say about that. But I was also able to appoint, to select people for the Speakers Bureau, people who spoke to the university. And I considered one of my greatest accomplishments was getting the head of Youth with a Mission. His name suddenly slipped my mind. I had it here a second ago. But anyway, Cunningham, Lauren Cunningham. And so I got him, invited him to speak at the university, and I was able to pay him $5,000 out of student body funds in order to speak one time at our university. And I considered that a great triumph, because instead of funding radicals, I was funding a great missionary. I'm sure he didn't get too many speaking engagements for $5,000. But anyway, but the anti-war movement was big, Black Power was big, anti-racism, anti-Americanism, really all of the same stuff that we're dealing with today. I mean, it's almost the same deal. And so I remember getting some instruction from the National Student Association to organize protests against the war on May 1st, 1971, and because they were doing it all across the country. And so they wanted to have this massive student movement in May 1st, 1971. And to be anti-war in 1971 was also to be fairly anti-American. And some of the people that were strongly anti-war would go to North Vietnam, for example. You remember Hanoi, what's her name? Hanoi Jane, she went there. But she was anti-war. But, when you think about it, going to Hanoi, the people were fighting and speaking against America and American troops and calling them murderers, American troops as murderers. John Kerry was a part of that, too. He was as worthless as the day is long, still is, as it turns out. But anyway, all of this anti-war and anti-America was basically a communist front, which is why they chose May 1st, because May 1st is International Workers' Day. I mean, they have a big parade back in Russia. They would have one. I'm sure China has one on May 1st as they celebrate workers, right? But it's the Communist Workers' Day is what it really is. And, the May Day riots that they have in Seattle every year, I mean, that's all inspired by the same kind of people. It's anti-American, but it's communist. These are communists that sponsored on May 1st. They were then. I mean, I was getting the information straight from the communists back in the day. They thought I was that. I wasn't. I was conservative. I've always been conservative, I volunteered for the military when I was a student. They rejected me, but I dropped my draft deferment, and they called me up, to the recruiting station, and not the recruiting station, the induction center. Passed my first test and then flunked the physical. But anyway, so I didn't go to Vietnam. But I was willing to, and I partly why I dropped my student deferment is I was so disgusted with the anti-war people and their anti-Americanism. I just disgusted with it. But anyway, so we get the word, let's go out and demonstrate and riot and provoke the police into overreacting so we can charge them with police brutality. And this was all supposed to happen May 1st, 1971. So I'm sitting there looking at all this stuff and thinking about it, and I said to myself, this is nuts. We're not going to do this. I'm not going to participate in that kind of thing. So I got a group of my friends, Christian friends, and they said, what are we going to do about this? They want us to go out and demonstrate and riot and carry on against the government. What are we going to do? And so we cooked up this scheme to put on a concert. It was called the Sweet Jesus, Prince of Peace Rock Festival. And the whole idea was Jesus, sweet Jesus, this was 1971, sweet Jesus, but the Prince of Peace. If you want to have peace in this world, you don't go do it by going out and protesting against the government or rioting in the streets. It's about Jesus in the hearts. And so this was our message. And so we decided we were going to hold it in the center of the university, in the quad. And so we invited in bands. It was hard to come by Christian bands in 1971 because there'd never been anything like this before. There were no Jesus festivals of any kind prior to this. And so, but we did find some Christian bands, and we had them scheduled for May 1st, 1971, because we were going to run opposite the protests against the war. And so it was going to be a Jesus festival. And so when the university figured out how big it was going to be, they said, hey, instead of having it in the middle of the university, why don't you go down to the stadium, McCullough Stadium in Salem, Oregon, and we'll let you have that, and you can have your rock concert down there. And so we said, okay. And so we went down to McCullough Stadium. And on May 1st, 1971, we had about 5,000 people show up. It was awesome. And that was the start of what became the Jesus Festivals. My youth pastor was there as well as my pastor. And they saw what was going on. And they said, we can do something with this. And so a couple of years later, they started Jesus Northwest. But it was Jesus Northwest. I had to correct them on it because they called themselves the first festival. I said, technically you weren't, because your pastor, the guy who's supposedly organizing this, was at our event as students, and that's where he got the idea from. And it was, is huge, for that day, 5,000 people. I mean, this was the Woodstock era, right? And so festivals, they were going on secularly, but this was the first of the Christian things. So that was 50 years ago. May 1st, that's why it's an important day to me. May 1st, 1971. And then I started as pastor at Cedar Park 40 years ago, May 1st, 1981. So 10 years after that event. And so May 1st for me is one of those days, on the calendar that just has a lot of personal meaning to me. And I consider, because all of my life I have been trying, not all my life, all my adult life, I've been trying to build the work of God and do it in various ways. And I've been a pretty patriotic American, and I have been, and I am today. I'm a little disgusted with a lot of things about America, but I still believe in America, and I want to do my best to support it to become the kind of country that it should be. But anyway, that was May Day, and we were coming up on May Day here shortly, and so you know what I'll be thinking about on that day. But tonight we are in Joshua and the battle for the promised land, and as we have been in the past. Now, last week we emphasized the idea out of chapter 10 and the southern campaign for Israel, that no matter even if 400 years have elapsed, the promise to Abraham about the land was still good. The passage of time does not diminish the promise of God. I mean, if you were really lively, you could have said amen there, because that was actually a pretty good statement. The passage of time does not diminish the promise of God. Well, see, there you go. Some people just have to be encouraged a little bit. I'm not an amen kind of a guy, but every once in a while I even surprise myself. When I listen to it, I think, I almost said amen to myself on that one. But anyway, so the passage of time for Joshua, even though 400 years had passed, and it had not made a difference to God. Because as we said last week, when God was laying the groundwork for the Exodus, he referenced the promise to Abraham as the reason for the Exodus. I'm going to bring you out of Egypt in the Exodus because I haven't forgotten what I said to Abraham 400 years ago. I still remember that, and you people are in the wrong country right now. And so I need to get you out of Egypt back up to the land where I promised Abraham, so I'm going to intervene on your behalf. And just because Pharaoh wants to keep you here doesn't mean he can, because the word is going to be, let my people go so they can serve me. That is, in fact, what happened. So we've covered the central campaign, Jericho and Ai, and then last week the southern campaign. So today, we're going to do the northern campaign. But all of the same ideas could be brought out. That is, that the passage of time does not diminish the promises of God. Yeah, and you're getting there. And so, just because the Bible was written 2,000 years ago, doesn't mean that the promises of the Bible are no longer valid these 2,000 years later. They're still valid. What Jesus promised back then, what the Word of God promised back then, still applies today. And doesn't matter time and culture, the promises of God are forever, and they endure. All right, so we're going to do the northern campaign right now. And so I'll read the passage out of chapter 11, and it's going to reference these basic locations. Notice Hazor toward the top there in white. It was the kind of the leading city of Israel. It was the leading city of Israel at the time of that area. And it organized a group of kings in the northern region to oppose the Jews coming into the land. And so you'll see some of these names. So I'm going to read now, starting with chapter 11. We'll read quite a few verses. In fact, I'm going to read the whole section. When Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of this, that is, heard all the success of the Israelis in the southern part of the country, he sent word to Jobab, king of Madon, to the kings of Shimron and Asheph, and to the northern kings who were in the mountains, and the Arabah south of Kinnereth, in the western foothills, and in Naphoth Dor on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and west, to the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, and Jebusites in the hill country, and to the Hivites below Hermon in the region of Mizpah. They came out with all their troops and a large number of horses and chariots, a huge army as numerous as the sand on the seashore. Now, this would be one case, by the way, where we are not literalists. So we say, oh, I wonder how many sands are on the seashore, and that's how many soldiers they have. You know, it's a picture. It's a word picture. There's a lot of sand on the seashore. There was a lot of soldiers gathered in that place, and that's the meaning of it. So you do have a certain amount of picturesque language in this passage. You know, we're not fundamentalists or literalists when it comes to the Bible. You know, we don't believe, so for example, when I say his eyes fell to the floor, you know, we don't look on the floor for someone's eyes in a literal way. You know, we go with the plain sense meaning of the passage. That's what we are. So what it plainly says is what we plainly think. You know, not taking literally words like numerous as the sand on the seashore. Okay, that is an expression. You know, he was as ugly on a stick. You know, that's an expression, but not to be taken literally necessarily. Okay, they came out with all their troops. All these kings joined forces and made camp together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them slain over to Israel. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots." So Joshua and his whole army came against them suddenly at the waters of Merom and attacked them. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. They defeated them and pursued them all the way to Greater Sidon, to Misrephoth Maim, and to the valley of Mizpah on the east, until no survivors were left. Joshua did to them as the Lord had directed. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots. At that time Joshua turned back and captured Hazor and put its king to the sword. Hazor had been the head of all these kingdoms. Everyone in it they put to the sword. They totally destroyed them, not sparing anyone that breathed, and he burned Hazor itself. Joshua took all these royal cities and their kings and put them to the sword. He totally destroyed them, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. Yet Israel did not burn any of the cities built on their mounds, except Hazor, which Joshua burned. The Israelites carried off for themselves all the plunder and livestock of these cities, but all the people they put to the sword until they completely destroyed them, not sparing anyone that breathed. As the Lord commanded his servant Moses, so Moses commanded Joshua, and Joshua did it. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses. So Joshua took this entire land, the hill country and all the Negev, the whole region of Goshen, the western foothills, the Arabah, and the mountains of Israel with their foothills, from Mount Halak, which rises toward Seir, to Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon, below Mount Hermon. He captured all their kings and put them to death. Joshua waged war against all these kings for a long time, except for the Hivites living in Gibeon. Not one city made a treaty of peace with the Israelites, who took them all in battle. For it was the Lord himself who hardened their hearts to wage war against Israel, so that he might destroy them totally, exterminating them without mercy, as the Lord had commanded Moses. At that time Moses went and destroyed the Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, Debir, and Anab, from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua totally destroyed them in their towns. No Anakites were left in Israelite territory. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did any survive. So Joshua took the entire land, just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as inheritance to Israel, according to their tribal divisions. Then the land had rest from war. Well, that's the northern campaign. I showed you cities, pictures of the various cities in the southern campaign, but the only one I have really good pictures of in the northern campaign is Hazor. In fact, it's the only one of these places that I can recall visiting other than Dor. I visited Dor one time, a long, long time ago. It was where glass was developed very early on. And I found some little tiny pieces of glass at Dor. green glass. So that was probably 3,000 years old or 2,500 years old. And anyway, I made it into some jewelry. And I had some left over, and I gave some to Jazzy Smith the other day for her to make jewelry from. But anyway, Hazor was an important city. In all of Israel, it was the largest city. It had a population of about 20,000 people. And when I say it was a large city, the lower city was about 175 acres, and the upper city was about 60 acres. Go on top of the mount about 60, down below 175. So, I mean, here at Cedar Park on this property, we have about 40 acres. So it was about 6 times the size of this piece of property that we're on right now. But as cities go in those days, that was extremely large. Jerusalem was only 8 acres at the time. Remember, we said that Jericho was about 8 acres at the time. So it was, orders of magnitude larger than any of these other cities. So it was a big city. In fact, it was one of the biggest cities and one of the most important cities on the entire Fertile Crescent. So you go up north and then go up, and all the way down to Babylon and all the way down to the Persian Gulf, the Fertile Crescent. It was one of the most important cities. It was on the major trade route from Egypt to Mesopotamia. So if you were traveling, you basically followed the path of the Fertile Crescent. So you'd come from Egypt, you would come up through the Shephelah of Israel, through the foothills basically, or along the coast, and then you would come up to Hazor, and then you would turn toward Damascus, and then keep on going in that arch on over. So all of the trade of that area passed through Hazor. So they were big and they were powerful. They had these iron chariots, and so they were the dominant force. They were the biggest city in the area. So of all of the battles that Joshua had to fight, Hazor would be the biggest and the toughest. Well, not only did Hazor have its own force, later we read they had 900 iron chariots, but he organized all these other cities as well. And so they fielded an army. And the Bible here describes it as the sands on the seashore. It was a big army. It was powerful. Because, an iron chariot in those days, I'll show you pictures of some, were like having, Abram tanks. They were big, they were fast, and they had some power connected to them because they would be a driver and an archer, or maybe 2 archers, and so it was powerful. So here's some pictures of it. This tower is one of the strong points of Hazor. Now you can see how it kind of overlooks the hills there. I point out that this picture is taken in the fall because everything is brown. You get 2 different looks for Israel. If you go in the spring, which is a nice time to go, everything's green. If you go in the fall, everything's brown. This picture shows you that same tower in the distance there. And there's Pastor Jay down taking pictures of the flowers. Because weeds in Israel are something you photograph. Here you spray them with Roundup, but there you photograph them and they're beautiful. You see, but so you notice you see that tower is on that mound. Well, that means it was part of the upper city. And in the scripture here, it mentioned how it took all of the cities on their mounds. Well, that's how they built their cities. And when those mounds exist today, and you see them, one that hasn't been excavated, it looks like a hill, but they call them tells. And so you see a hill of a particular shape like that, and you're pretty sure there's an ancient city buried under that. And that's how they've found various things over the centuries. But here is a look at, you get a sense of how it's built on the hilltop. And this opening picture is of me with, that's a metal soldier they've got up there for tourists to take pictures on. And so I did. And there's our daughter Sandy up there on that same spot. But, you know, it was, it's the part that's been restored at this point in time. But it's impressive. You know, it's an impressive fort. If you go to the Israeli Museum, I took this picture of some molds that they have for casting spears and axe heads. So weapons, you know, iron weapons, you know, they obviously molten metal, and they create them like this. And so this is some of the molds, and obviously those are some uses of those molds that they've been put to from the museum. This picture is a stone relief, but it gives you a sense of what the chariots and how they looked. So they could be as many as 4 horses. This looks like to be a 2 horses, or maybe 4 horses, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. But and then you notice the one soldier's got there's 2 shields, and there's one bow and arrow there, and so a driver. But anyway, and here's an artist who tried to capture that same idea in how things looked. But this would have been, you know, if you're a soldier on foot and something like this is coming at you, especially hundreds of them, it'd be pretty intimidating. You know, a horse is intimidating. I mean, I'm scared of horses, you know, when they're just eating grass out in the field, you know. But anyway, that would be pretty impressive, especially if there's somebody inside of it who is wanting to shoot at you. Hazor. This is also from the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem, but they've excavated it. It's been an important excavation over the years. And these 2 lions guarded the sacred space of the Orthostat temple in Hazor. And there's an interesting story about Deborah and Barak, because you remember it was the king of Hazor, by the same name, Jabin, but at a later time, that came against Deborah and Barak out in the Valley of Armageddon. And you recall that there was the chariots, the chariots became of no use. And you remember why? Because it was raining like crazy. And the Kishon River was flooding. And that valley, when after it's been raining torrentially, it's mud, because it's basically a river valley. And so it's soft mud. And a chariot going through soft mud that's made out of iron, you know, doesn't have big wheels, like mud wheels on it, you know. It's got, you know, iron wheels, and so it becomes useless. And so now you're just mired to a piece of equipment. You're standing up in the air to boot, you know, and so you're a better target than before. Well, in the temple at Hazor had, it was the temple of the rain god. And so the rain god was basically, that was who the king would have gone to his temple of the rain god and prayed for success, because rain is essentially synonymous with prosperity. And so you'd pray to the rain god that he would help you. And the God says, I'm going to have a little fun with this. And so he gets them out there in the river valley and then just dumps buckets on them, and they can't move. And how did the rain god do for you there, Jabin, king of Hazor? Did he help you out? He didn't, did he? And defeating Hazor was the same as defeating the rain god, as defeating the pagan gods. And it's particularly clear in the story of Deborah and Barak, but it's equally clear, it seems to me, in this particular battle, because all of these cities had their favorite deities. And, you know, you want a great deity to provide for you and to protect you in battle. And if you got those 2 things, you got pretty much all you need. Well, so if your God is on, the God of Israel is on your side, and you basically clean out all of these powerful militaries in one day, whose God is better? Is the God of Israel better, or are these pagan gods better at providing and protecting? Well, it's a clear answer. And so, God loves competition. And, when you come out there with your God all fired up, God says, oh, I didn't know it was going to be this kind of a contest. And so, although he really did know, and so he said, okay, let's do it. Let's rumble. Your chariots aren't going to rumble, but we're going to. This is one of the deities there. Same picture from the front. You notice the crescent moon on the chest. The moon is always a symbol of prosperity, and so this would be here. And here's a little text that I took this picture that it described in the Israeli museum on the statue of the storm god on the back of the bull. And so he was the powerful deity representing the sun and the moon and all of that. But Joshua defeats all of these accumulated alliance of northern kings in one fell swoop. They chase them for, 25 miles or 30 miles until, as they spread out in all directions. And they basically clean them out, defeat them. And then Joshua goes back to Hazor and he burns the city. I think I told you before, it's one of three cities. Jericho. Did they burn Jericho? Burned Jericho. They burned Ai, and they burned Hazor. And this is a ridiculous picture, but I took it. And that's what that black junk there in the center is actually the charcoal. They, as they work down through it, they come to this burn layer that shows that indeed the city was at some point in time burned. But they had strong fortifications. This goes down into the water tunnel underneath. There's Sandy. That's an olive press. So there's a big heavy stone hung on the end. They fill up those bags in the center there with olives, and then they put the weight on it, and that's called the pressing of the olives. And so what do you call the first oil that comes out of a pressing? That's the extra virgin olive oil. And through various pressings, you get, it's the lightest oil, and it gets heavier as you go down through it. This is up on top of Hazor, Phyllis Zylstra. And another picture there, that's Dr. Dwayne Brady, one of our tours. There's Pastor Jay. And you see the other three people, the two in the back, the guy in the blue shirt is Dave Fend and his wife Peggy. I think you know Jason Shirley. But the Fens, they live over in Wenatchee now. But when you see my pastor's pics, David is the guy that manages the website for me. And so he posts all that stuff and keeps it up to date, and I definitely appreciate it. And he did extra work for me this year when I basically have a competitor who has taken over and has taken pastorspics.org. I have pastorspics.com, and so he runs stuff at opposite of me. And so, but anyway, I have two websites now, Pastor Joe's Picks and pastorspics.com, both of which I put my voting recommendations on. Did we end up back at the beginning? Oh no, we're good. Wait a second here. Sorry, my pictures went haywire. But anyway, yeah, there we go. So anyway, that's at Hazor. We're stopping, checking stuff around. And this map gives you, we started with this, the various battles that took place. Well, so this is Hazor and the defeat of Hazor. When you read chapter 11, as we did a moment ago, the idea that you get is that they were completely successful, which they were. On that particular day, against those particular Allied armies, they were very, very successful. They certainly, the residents put up a fight. God said he hardened their hearts. And so they said, we're going to fight these Israelis. And so, okay, if there's a fight, they get cleaned out. And that's what happened. They got cleaned out, everyone except for the Gibeonites who had that peace deal. But it was God who did that, defeating the people, but also defeating their gods. So this is kind of the conclusion of the big battles in the book of Joshua. Then when you come to Joshua chapter 13, you have God, after a passage of many years, because probably these battles that we've been describing these last few weeks probably took 7 years, I'm guessing, just an estimate because it doesn't say anywhere, but it took a while. And but I want to put in context the promise that Joshua had, because it sets up the next part of the scripture. When we started the book of Joshua, after we got across the Jordan, we talked about the promise that God gave to Joshua with regard to this city. I'd like to just read that. We read it earlier, but this is where God promises to be with them, promises to be helpful, and encourages them to be strong and courageous. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land that I'm about to give them to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Okay, that's a big promise. Everywhere you set your foot, that's going to be yours. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the great sea on the west, that is the Mediterranean. No one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. Think of that. No one can stand up against you. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, first time he says it, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. Be strong and very courageous, for the second time. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may be successful wherever you go. Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you'll be prosperous and successful. That is, keep following the law that I've given you. Have I not commanded you for the third time? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. I mean, that has to be the greatest promises that were ever made to anybody. No one can stop you. I'm going to be with you. You just need to be strong and courageous, and it's all going to come your way. And that's a tremendous promise. You recall that Joshua and Caleb were two of the 12 spies that had come into Israel 40 years earlier. There were giants in the land. The cities had big walls around them. So now, are their walls any smaller? No, if anything, they're bigger. Are the giants gone? No, they're still there. Are the armies powerful? They're as powerful or more powerful than ever before. And so nothing has changed except for the worse in the environment that Joshua faces. But God said, be strong and courageous, because everywhere you go, I'm going to give you that land. And no one will be able to stand up against you. Well, Israel believed the 10 spies who said, oh, we can't do this, too hard, too difficult. Well, there's a tremendous message in this, and that is we live in a time of great fear. People are genuinely afraid. I mean, they're afraid of getting sick, of getting COVID and dying. Although hardly anybody dies from it, nonetheless, they are afraid of it. And they're afraid. I was following some people online, and they've decided that they shouldn't buy a house in Seattle, because what if the real estate bubble bursts and they lose money? That's what you call living by fear. Because you're also going to pass up the opportunity of making a lot of money, because housing is going through the roof right now, and it probably is going to for a good while. I mean, I'm not an expert. I have no knowledge or anything like that, but I was just thinking about the fear in which people live, and so they'll pass up opportunities that they could have had if they would put their faith in God. Follow the Lord's direction and pray about things like this as you do everything. But don't live your life in fear. That's the point. Because if God is with you, He's going to help you. And He is with you. And so you don't want to let the walled cities and the giants and the armies on the other side cause you not to act in your own best interest or to believe the promises of God. And I want to encourage you not to be afraid of the future. I started off telling you what my world was like 50 years ago when I was we were facing, the racism issues, the black power issues, the socialists, the communists. China was involved, Russia was involved. North Vietnam, Cuba. We had a lot of enemies in the world, and they were powerful. And that was the world that we were facing 50 years ago. And there were screwball governors back then. When in Oregon, where I was, Tom McCall was the governor, and he was literally putting on almost like what you'd call a chop zone, the Vortex conference that festival that they held outside of Estacada, Oregon. He basically told the police, stay out. If the people want to do drugs, let them do drugs. Whatever they want to do, let them do. We're not going to intervene. This is 50 years ago. Bad governance has been with us for a long time. Weak leaders have been around a long time and caving in to the basest of human instincts. If you don't have law and order, you don't have a country. And basically they were saying, we're not going to enforce the law, which is what that means is no law and order. But that's 50 years ago. And the world that I faced as a college student, and being involved in all those things, that's what I was looking forward to. Except we've had a pretty good run the last 50 years. America wasn't ready to fall apart at that point in time. And you shouldn't live your life with a doomsday scenario, believing in doom and gloom. You should live your life believing in God. Because the truth is, God does want to do something. And He wants to do something today. And He wants to do something in Bothell. And He wants to use this church to accomplish that. And so you don't need to live your life in fear about what the future is or how things are going to go, but trusting God, believing in God, putting your faith in God for you as a person, but also for us as a church and for us as a community and as a country. Believe in God. And God is not intimidated by all of this garbage that's going on, by the bad governor we've got and the bad president we've got. And you think, oh man, they're going to ruin this country. Well, they're going to try. But does God have any say in that? And are they going to succeed in what their plans are? Let's believe in God. And let's be saying, God, what do you want to do today? And, maybe it's to do the Sweet Jesus Prince of Peace Rock Festival and just make a little different statement. Maybe it's just to preach the gospel right here and give an altar call and baptize people, which is what's going on. This is a great day. It's a great day of opportunity for the ministries of this church. And I'd suggest to you that you don't need to be afraid yourself. You're not going to starve. God is going to be with you. You say, but I don't know how I'm going to make it. Well, you're going to put your faith in God, and He's going to help you. And he doesn't promise to tell you everything that he's going to do for the next 40 years in your life if we are going to be around that long, which I don't think we will. For sure, I'm not going to be. But I'm not even sure every one of us here will be. But anyway, because time passes, and then so do we. But God's got something going, and we don't want to be afraid. Well, in the notes I have, for we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. So God knows the work that he has for us to do. And those works were prepared in advance. So God says, you know, in 2021, I have some work for you to do. And he said, and I've been thinking about this for thousands of years. And I've been thinking about you for thousands of years and what you're going to do in that point in time. And you said, who are you talking about? Moi? But yes, God's talking about every one of us. Everyone here in the chapel, everyone online. We have a place, we have good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. So let's go back to Joshua. Joshua has had great success, 7 years of war or thereabouts, and a great part of the land belonged to them. So they come to this point of success, and it's like they hit pause. That is, and I'm setting this up, they have the promise, wherever your feet go, I'm going to give it to you. But after this series of battles, their feet stop going. So they don't go anywhere anymore. They settle down. And you know, after you've been fighting for a period of time, you want to settle down. The boys come home from the war. They want to get married and have a family. There's a lot of land that's available. And so they got some cows out of the deal and some horses. And so, they take up farming. And pretty soon the land is indeed flowing with milk and honey. And, you get married, and first thing you do, you want to have kids. And so you raise some kids, and then you think about, well, we got to add another room on the back because, Charlie's getting bigger, and we need another room back there. And so you add another room, and we're going to have to plant a little more corn this year because Charlie's eating like a horse. And so, so things continue to go. And that's how it goes. As I call it, the pioneers very quickly become settlers. And the classic story of that is among the Pilgrims. Pilgrims came from England, and what other country primarily? History quiz. Holland, exactly. If you go to Amsterdam, you can go to the church, and they're quite proud of the fact that they sent pilgrims to America from Holland. But anyway, the Dutchmen, although a lot of them were English in Holland, but they come to America, and it's a tough deal. It was tough when they landed in America, and to survive, and they nearly starved to death the first winter, and it got down to where they were rationing 5 grains of corn per person per day. They tried to be socialists back in the beginning. We have everything in common. They realized that's not going to work. Let's let everybody farm their own piece. They'll work a whole lot harder when they're taking care of their own stuff. But anyway, so after a time, they have a meeting. And the question was, shall we build a road 5 miles from the coast inland? And the people said, why? Why would anybody want to go 5 miles from here? And so they voted no. The same people that had just sailed across the Atlantic Ocean not so long before now vote no on building a road 5 miles west from the East Coast. What that tells you is that pioneers become settlers. They settle down and they don't want to keep moving. And you can, you understand that, I understand it, that there is this thing called settling down. I put it in my notes here. When I became pastor of Cedar Park, on the first Sunday, we came with Rosie and Sandy. They were born before we got here. And on the first Sunday we were here as pastors, we dedicated our son Ben to the Lord. His kids are in the youth group over there now. But he was a baby about yay long back then. And then on Father's Day in 1982, our son Zachary was born. And, I'm so grateful for the work of God because Rosie found Craig here. Sandy found Jay here. Jay was telling about it the other day. He'd been here a long time, his entire life. And I've been his pastor since he was 3 years old, And so, but, all of that. And then, Ben's married now and got 3 kids. And Zachary, I don't think he's ever going to get married. I just don't see it. Don't see the prospects. But anyway, and so we have 11 grandchildren. They're all either on their way or have already gone through Cedar Park Christian School. And we started the school way back when with Jay and Sandy and 8 of our preschool kids. That was our first class. And by the way, the first person that I hired was a music pastor, Don Galloway. He was older than me. And his wife, Ginger, she was a preschool teacher. So I had put together a book when I was in the district office called How to Start a Christian School. So Ginger, a preschool teacher, I said, Ginger, I have a job for you. I would like for you to help me start Cedar Park Christian School. Here's the book on how to do that. We put it together. I'd put it together when I was in the district office, had all the laws and all that kind of stuff. Here's the book. Do it like this. And so that's how we started it 40 years ago, almost 40 years ago. But and then I hired 2 other guys, Dwayne Brady, one of the guys you saw there, and Frank McAllister over the next couple of years. All of them older than me. I was the youngest person on staff because I was young. I was 30 years old. That was a long time ago. And almost 31. And so I wanted to, I had to balance that thing out. So I hired 3 associates, my first 3 associates, all of them older than me, and in most cases, a lot older. Frank McAllister, the superintendent, was retired. And Dwayne was, I don't know how old he is, probably 80 by now. But anyway, I chose them in great part because they were older. I felt like we needed a little maturity on the staff, And so, but the point I was making is that just because you're doing the work of God doesn't mean you don't want to also settle down and raise a family, and provide for your family. I will admit that one of the reasons I started Cedar Park Christian School is because I didn't want my kids going to the public school. And so it's kind of a selfish thing. You want to provide for your own family. And I'm grateful that the church provided spouses and relationships that have been very important in the family. And it is one of the things that you hope for out of a church, is that you hope that your children will find mates there or in the general circle of the church, and you hope that they'll find lifelong friends there because, having common background. I've been married to Linda, enough to be 50 years this year, and we were in a little tiny church. She and I were about the only 2 teenagers. So, I was about her only guy to pick, and she was about the only girl for me to pick. There was certainly nobody in my grade of either male or female. And she's a couple of years younger than me. And so, but, you think about that. We were in the same little tiny church of 100 people or under 100 people. And, but her parents and my parents were of similar background, had a similar faith. In the church, we had a similar culture. We had lots of similarities that made life a lot easier. No marriage is easy, But I'll tell you, it's a lot harder if you don't have anything in common. It gets a lot harder. And so having common background has stood me in good stead. And my wife has been a faithful woman and a woman of God all of these years. And she's never deviated, as I have not deviated. We've both been faithful to each other, and we've supported each other. And one of the reasons I'm retired today, in great part, is because to be a blessing to her. She stuck with me for a lot of years, and I'll tell you, for her and her personality, ministry is not easy. Me and my personality, I like people, get along with people. I don't mind hanging out with people. They don't tire me out. With her, it's totally opposite. I mean, like this lockdown has been a godsend as far as she's concerned. This has been the greatest thing that happened in her life. Don't have to talk to people and don't have to see anybody, and it's a great life. Just out there, and we sold our chickens, and so we don't even have chickens now. But anyway, I'm just saying, building a life is part of it. So in a way, I don't fault the Israelis for pausing after chapter 11 and 12. But God, on the other hand, here's how Joshua chapter 13, verse 1 says. When Joshua was old and well advanced in years, the Lord said to him, "You are very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over." Listen, when God says that you're old, you're old. He said, "Joshua, I've been looking at, you're old." And he says, not only you're very old and well advanced in years, and I'm looking around at the promised land, and there's a whole lot of it you haven't walked on yet. That's the basic point. I promised you I'd give you all the land you walked on, but you're camped out down there in Gilgal or someplace like that. And what happened to all the rest of this? And so, let me read chapter 13 a little bit. When Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, "You are now very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over. This is the land that remains, all the regions of the Philistines and the Geshurites, from the Shihor River on the east of Egypt to the territory of Ekron on the north. All of it counted as Canaanite, though held by the 5 Philistine rulers in Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. The territories of the Avivites on the south, all the land of the Canaanites, from Ara of the Sidonians as far as Aphek, and the border of the Amorites. The area of Byblos and all of Lebanon to the east, from Baal Gad below Mount Hermon to Lebo Hamath. As for all the inhabitants of the mountain regions from Lebanon to Misrephoth Baim, that is, all the Sidonians, I myself will drive them out before the Israelites. Be sure to allocate this land to Israel for an inheritance, as I have instructed you, and divide it as an inheritance among the 9 tribes and half of the tribe of Manasseh." Now, this is shows you some of this. This picture is better because the area that outlined in red is the area that Israel had taken. But outside of the red, you can see, like he mentioned, the Philistine country. Between the red line and the coast, that's quite an area. So the Philistines still controlled all of that. And up there in the north, in Lebanon, and those areas, and on into Syria, they still control that. And there's big areas. I mean, they controlled a lot in the center, but there were big areas that they didn't control, that they hadn't taken. Now, bear in mind, God had said, everywhere you go, I'm going to give it to you. Nobody can stand up against you. But what are they doing? They weren't going after it. They were all, eating grapes and, drinking tea or whatever you make from grapes. They were drinking wine, sitting around at night drinking wine and eating pomegranates and, drinking wine, and time was passing. And as it turns out, Joshua, the one to whom the promise was made, was getting old. Not just old, very old. And so really, the truth is, later we'll come to it, he'll make a great speech. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Well, great, old man. That's a great speech, but, kind of looking at the physique there, and I'm thinking you're not probably going to take much, except extra time to get up the hill. And that was the situation. Joshua, to his credit, had a good heart, but he was kind of losing the capacity and didn't really have the ability anymore, it seems to me. And so what God did is he told them to divide the land. And so they did divide the land. And this is the division of the land. Well, that isn't the division of the land. Kind of visualize that map. It's down, yeah. So this is how they divided the land. I can't remember if that other map had a... Let's see, I should have had a map that had both the untaken land and the allocation among the tribes, but I didn't include it. But the bottom line is only a couple of the tribes had territory assigned to them where virtually all of the land was already taken by Israel. So virtually, I think like 10 of the tribes had some of the land that Israel had already captured, but also some of the land that was uncaptured at this point in time. And the point of that is every tribe essentially had a job to do. So from this point going forward, it's not going to be the United States of Israel or the United Tribes of Israel acting in unison, but it's going to be individual tribes responsible for their particular area of responsibility. That was how the battle was to go forward. But I titled this message tonight, Wasted Opportunities, because Joshua had the promise, but he didn't get it done in the end. And when you think about it, there were great consequences to that failure. There were a lot of negative consequences for centuries, and some people could argue that up to our present day. The failure of Joshua to take the land and to continue to live by the book and his descendants is why we have the mess we have today. If that was all Israel's land, if they had taken it and served the Lord, it would still be theirs. It'd be an entirely different situation. When you have the opportunity, you need to seize the opportunity. And you need to go for it. And go with God's favor and God's blessing. Because there's a whole lot of land that remains to be possessed. And so God basically said, divide the land for an inheritance among the tribes. Give everybody their allocation and tell them to go for it. And over the next chapters, you'll have quite a bit of that. I'm not sure how I'm going to handle the next chapters yet. I haven't figured that out. But when I do, I'll be sure to let you know. You'll be the first to know. I assure you that. But anyway, we're going to come to the allocations. A lot of it is just real estate deeds, the next chapters. But till you get to the end. And they go to Shiloh and set up the tabernacle there and allocate the property of the land of Israel and basically send everybody on their way. And then they launch into the period that's going to be called the period of the judges. The next 400 years will be like that. But anyway, that is the scenario. Seize the opportunity. God's given you promises. Don't be sitting on the premises when you should be standing on the promises. That's a great line, wasn't it? I've used it before. Okay, anybody with a comment or a question? I stirred you up on that one, didn't I? Okay, well, that's how you feel about it. Stand up. And we'll pray. And I should have paused to ask about if there's any online, but I didn't, so too late now. All right. Praise God. Lord, you're a good God. You're with us. We thank you for it. I pray, Lord, that you would take away all fear and anxiety out of people's minds. Help them this very moment to put their faith in you, their trust in you, to believe your word, to believe the promises of your word, and not to be anxious or afraid about these difficult times in which we're living, but be assured of the fact that God has a plan that he is working out, both to our personal lives and to our life as a church, that you are accomplishing things and you will accomplish things going forward in time. So, Lord, I commit each person here and each person online to your care today. And as we go our separate ways, I pray that the peace of God that passes all understanding will rest and abide with us all, both now and forevermore. Amen. God be with you.